All right, we got the G-Wagons out. We're doing a little test day. It's on the small Geometron, which isn't really that small.
Nope.
But I'm on the large, which is pretty big. The main goal for today is just to get laps on both, switch bikes, and kind of just see what the difference is between like around 50 mils in reach with kind of everything else pretty similar. All right, we did one warm-up lap, so this is the second run on my bike.
Youngest XL bike down there.
Time to try out the small boy. You get used to it and then you hop on something else and realize like how different it actually is.
Yeah.
Feels a lot different already. Woo! What's the tire? Yo. What's the tire, dude?
Going between the two bikes, like I was following you the previous run on that bike, obviously. And I'm like, bro, that's a different line than like what I would be on. And I'm riding this bike, I end up on that line. And it's like, oh, it kind of like...
Makes sense. I haven't looked at myself on that bike that much, but looking at you on it, it looks ridiculous, dude.
It's a big bike.
It looks so...
Like it's totally, like it's rideable, you know? Like it's totally rideable and it's fun. And like the faster, like the speed you would need for this to be practical is like a World Cup track. You need to be hauling ass for it to feel good. Ooh. Man is wild. Fuck that jump. Oh!
All right, so we just got done with a day of riding. There's minor differences in the build, but the whole goal was kind of just to see how the different sizing works out.
Yeah, it's crazy to ride two of almost the same bike, different sizes. It's similar to like the video that was done on the Enduros, but it's also quite a bit different because the jump between these two bikes is a lot bigger. I think the geometry or like reach is about 475, and then the rear or chainstay is a 456.
And my bike is a large, and it's roughly a 515 reach, maybe 520 with how I have it set up. We're both running it in the 165 millimeter travel mode. Both the bikes felt really good, so it's hard to be like, oh yeah, this one's for sure better, this one's for sure worse. Like, I almost like liked the bike I got on the most recently the best.
Initially, like that bike, like I don't know, if like you pedal around a parking lot and it doesn't feel like that crazy out of like just different, just because you're not having to do anything on a trail. So like where your hands are and everything like actually feels pretty good and normal despite being rather abnormal. But then you get it on trail and like the bike is gonna go where it wants to go, and it's doesn't give you a whole lot of room to operate, I guess, in a way where like it's gonna take the line it wants to take. But if you just commit to that and just hold on, it's fast. Like the bike is very comfortable at speed. Like the trail today was like very, I'd say like not very tight, but definitely on the tighter side of things. And then once again, like had really good support, and that combination, like you just hold on to the bike, point, shoot, turn, and it turns. Like it's kind of wild how well a bike of that size of wheelbase can manage tight corners. Granted, they have a lot of support, so that helps. But yeah, like it's definitely like a lot of bike to get around turns, but it does hold speed and has like a lot of traction. And just once again, the stability in a straight line is like, I don't know, like how fast you could go on it. Like you could go really fast before the bike gets uncomfortable, basically. And I mean, and then I guess going to the size small, which has the same wheelbase as, say, a large Spire, for example. So it's really not that small. It's just like, you can just throw the bike kind of wherever you want. It's easier to place. It doesn't fully lock you into like what the bike wants to do. Whereas like that's like, I'm going here and you're just gonna hold on. That bike, you can actually point, shoot, like do whatever you want. And it's definitely not quite as stable, but you can just move around on the trail and take insides, outsides. Like it's crazy. Like the bike takes inside lines better than like anything I've owned. I'm not sure why, but like I feel like I never really have taken inside lines, and then that bike you can just be like, I'm gonna go, and it'll hold. So I don't know how you felt kind of comparing the two.
Yeah, I feel like a good way to articulate it is if you need to make like a mid-corner correction, it's possible on the smaller one, on Nick's bike. Whereas if you mess up the entry into the corner or you're offline, like it's a mission to bring this thing back into line. Like, with that being said though, I do think like what Nick was saying, like the line the bike wants to take is generally a really good line. It almost finds the smoothest, fastest arc through the corner, and as long as you're okay committing to that, it rewards you with a really smooth, nice line through the corner. And it has a ton of traction. One thing that I noticed I had to do switching between the bikes is
I feel like I can ride Nick's more relaxed, kind of more upright, and then, you know, place the bike where I want, where we switched back and forth to get some video clips, and nice.
Blood.
And I caught myself having to be like really mindful and remind myself to get over the front on the large. Because what happens when this bike goes through like tighter corners is you have to get the rear end to slide. So if you're in a more relaxed position and you're not being as engaged with your riding, like it'll just take you wide. And if you don't commit to being over the front and getting that rear end around to follow the front, it's going to leave you like going off the trail. But as long as you're super engaged, you're in that aggressive position, the bike responds really well. And I think there's a few clips where like you can kind of see me getting the rear end to slide, kind of oversteering, and then like banking into the next turn. And I don't know, I feel like I'm really in touch with the rear wheel when I'm on it with this bike, and I can like make that minute adjustment to like just break traction just enough to get it around those corners. So
Yeah, no, I could see that. Oh, another thing, yes, the bikes are super slack. Like there's no hiding the head angle on these bikes. Like I'm pretty sure my bike sits at about a 62. I think that's probably in the same neighborhood.
yeah.
And like if you're not gonna commit to leaning, the bike's not gonna turn. And that's one thing on the large that's cool is like you just come into the turn, start to lean in. I mean, you gotta commit and like throw the thing at the ground. It's just gonna hold though, and then that's like what it has to do to turn. If you just try to turn with the handlebars, I don't think it's gonna work. And like I don't know, the trail we were riding once again had good support, good turns. So like you just come in, lean the bike in, and then it would just rip the turn nicely. So that's definitely like when you're getting on bikes with head angles in the neighborhood of 62, it really like you have to lean the bike to turn. It's not a turn the bars to get the thing to turn. It's like a full commit, lean the bike, get it leaned over, turn, and it's going to do a good job of it, but it does require that commitment.
I'm going to do a long-term review going into like everything I've tried with the Geometron. I played with stems, a lot of the different mutators and stuff, so I'll kind of save the meat of that for the full review. But just today, I like really appreciated how much more playful my bike was in that shorter travel setting. And it's ridiculous to call a bike of this size playful, but the last lap we did together, I kind of like slowed down from like, you know, full on, you know, race pace or whatever, and kind of took the time to play with lines and be a little bit more playful. And honestly, the bike responded really well. And I think it's definitely takes a calibration period to like make sense of how this bike's going to react. But once you do, it rides incredibly well for how ridiculously big it is for our proportions. Initially switching to this bike after riding Nick's, you're like, man, it feels so big, but as soon as it's on trail, it consistently impresses me with how rideable it is. Then I also get on Nick's and I appreciate the
Normalness.
Yeah, the normalness and like the inputs I can make and just be a little bit more delicate with my lines. So I don't know. It's a trip. Like with this video, it's not like, yeah,
It's not performance based. There was no timing done,
Yeah.
so there's no like which is better. It's just trying to like articulate the difference between, I guess, essentially sizes and also just wheelbase.
Yeah.
This is like a study in wheelbase.
Yeah. My instinct tells me that this bike oftentimes feels slower, but is actually faster.
Yeah, I would agree that if you can make it work, it probably does carry a lot more speed, and like the general stability, like feels like you're going pretty almost slow, but I think that's just the stability. It's so stable that you almost feel slow, but you're going pretty quick. So that's something I noticed going back and forth is it definitely mutes what you're doing, but I think that gives you know, a higher level of confidence. Like if you're pushing that bike to the point where you're like, I'm going fast, you're probably going really fast.
Yeah.
So
The bike in this size starts to feel downhill bike levels of confidence. And we were chatting about, oh, this would be epic if you were going to Leger or Morzine or someplace like that. But also, I think that's where downhill bikes come in. And I think the level of confidence achieved with this is all in the chassis. I mean, it's not all in the chassis. The suspension performs great, but you're operating still within a constraint of 160, 170 mils of travel. And I think that's where you're meeting a downhill bike at a certain point. Is this relies heavily on the chassis, and a downhill bike, you don't have to go to that length of geometry to achieve that stability just because you have more suspension. And I think that's where the trade-off is. And you can get a bike that has a different, maybe more nimble cornering characteristic, that is still as stable and confidence inspiring, but it's achieved through suspension travel rather than like chassis stability.
there's a reason downhill bikes exist.
Yeah. I feel like that's a movement. People are trying to like just take trail bikes to the ultimate level, and it's cool, but also downhill bikes are better. I don't know.
Better for the job, right?
Yeah,
Like
right,
different
like-
tools for different jobs. But if you gotta have one and do everything, you know, if you can't have a quiver of bicycles, then if you have something that you can, you know, I don't know how practical like that is for like most scenarios. Like it's got to be on the for the environment for that to be like what it's for. I don't like, you know, it's like I feel like a World Cup track. You'd be like, oh, this is like rideable. Never been a World Cup track once again, but the stability I feel like is there. And then like that's like why I went with the size I went with, is because most of what I ride is like not that crazy, and I still want that essentially maneuverability over that extreme. It's like here, once again, it's kind of like the enduros. You have stability and maneuverability, and it's like which one do you want to go with, and which is like your priority.
Yeah, I think the difference here though is that both these bikes feel incredibly well balanced in their size. You know, we beat the chainstay balance thing to death. Yes, the ratio like isn't as balanced on the big one, but I mentioned this in a previous video. I feel like when the reach is and the head angle is so far out there, it just pulls your body a little bit more forward, and it almost negates like that balance thing. It's like, for me, it's not really an issue, and it just achieves that grip on the front wheel in a different way.
Yeah.
And I think one topic we've talked about in the past, and maybe this is a good way to articulate like why this bike feels more maneuverable, is really the arm travel thing. This bike, you're a lot more extended in your default position, so you have a lot less room to articulate your body around moving the bike. And I guess it's just like how you want to interact with your bike. This allows you to move around a lot more, suck up lips, and this one you're more like trusting the chassis of the bike, learning the chassis of the bike, and operating within it.
Yeah, another difference is I feel like how just even line choice between, like this is massive, is actually the line choice you take between the two bikes, and also how you read the terrain, because the way that bike, the length of it, the way it fits into certain transitions and bumps in the ground, you have to almost alter because it's going to interact with it differently. So if you want to get a pump with it, you just almost have to look for bigger bumps, and you have to like ignore like small stuff and just like
And run it over.
yeah, like run the small stuff over and like only focus on like big undulations and stuff, or like where you can link up. Like there's a cool clip in the GoPro footage where you can see like Brian, the way he uses the ground essentially differently than like say what I do, because on this bike I can fit into smaller pockets basically, and that's a huge difference. I was like, the way the bikes have to be ridden, or at least kind of to a degree, to be optimal is like, it's so different, and it's cool, like, to ride once again, similar bikes that are also very, very different, and like how you enter turns, exit turns, and then, yeah, just like pumping terrain is just, it's wild how different they work based on like that wheelbase factor. Yeah, so that was another massive difference, is like the timing too, is like the timing of how you like function with the terrain is so different.
Yeah. I think that's like maybe the biggest calibration piece, besides a little bit of body positioning, is just the timing. Yeah, it was interesting because we had these handling differences which were quite extreme in some cases, but the ride feel of the chassis like shined through that and was very, very, very similar. The suspension was very similar, albeit with the different shock tunes. The whole build and package of the bike is really solid, and that was apparent in both sizes.
I guess call it ride dynamics of like, one of the, at least for me, like, this is the first aluminum bike I've had in quite a while, and it definitely has some flex to it, but
I would say the rear end's on the flexier side of things.
Yeah, like buzzing tires on swing arms, flexy. But the trade-off of that is it has so much traction and composure. It's just the traction level that it has is crazy, and you can just point, shoot, and run stuff over, and it doesn't. I've never like had this bike get knocked off. I haven't ridden it much, but I haven't had it like really get like knocked off line. Sometimes you're like running into stuff and your bike kicks. It's unpleasant. And I'm yet to have that happen. Hopefully, can keep it on two wheels. But yeah, that's at least like a very standout characteristic of these frames, is like I guess the pliableness of it to how it tracks is pretty insane, and it's pretty comfortable to ride. So yeah, I'd say that's a big, just the comfort and grip that frame achieves is pretty high.
Things that were relevant besides the frames going back and forth, Nick has an O-chain and obviously a different fork. He's got the most recent Zeb, and I really, really liked the O-chain. I feel like Nick's bike was just a quieter, mellower ride experience. The forks is a big difference. Mine, the Öhlins, it's like I've always said, a ton of support, way more feel in that first half to 3/4 of travel. It's like you have something to push against, whereas the RockShox is really fluttery in that zone. And there are different sections on the trail which I think favored each of the forks, but the O-chain was, I think, a noticeable difference. A lot less feedback through the feet, and Nick's bike was overall a lot quieter, which I really appreciated.
A lot of mastic tape goes a long way.
Also, just to touch on climbing, I preferred the climbing position on my bike a lot more, actually.
Yeah, I would say like it's, once again, not knowing the numbers, but I imagine that the seat tube angle on Brian's large is definitely steeper, and yeah, it's definitely probably, I mean, it's a more pleasant climbing experience, which is weird. I mean, it isn't, because it has a better seated pedaling position, but
yeah, I mean, you just like sit there
and just, yeah,
and the chain stays hella long, so it just plants the front wheel, and I don't feel like I have to do anything besides just pedal. On Nick's bike, I was having to be a little bit more conscious of like being forward.
And occasionally you do have to kind of like do the old pull yourself forward and hold yourself to keep it from doing a little bit of a wheelie, but that's,
yeah, minor issue. We're not,
if it's that steep, I'll just stand up.
Not super concerned about it anyway, but
the bike's 40 pounds.
Yeah, I haven't weighed mine, but it's probably not far.
Like that bike is 39 12 ounces. Like, it's not light, but it doesn't ride heavy. That's one thing I'll touch on, is like it heavy bike, it rides really planted, but I'm gonna just say, because of suspension performance, it doesn't. This also, e-bikes feel the same way. If you set an e-bike suspension up correctly, at least to what I think correctly is for me, I don't feel like it's as heavy and like, people always say, oh, e-bike's so heavy and like awful to maneuver and stuff. It's like, well, if you set the suspension up correctly, it's actually not that bad. Bike's heavy, Just get stronger and pedaled up the hill.
Yeah, now that you mentioned that, I mean, you told me it was 40 pounds, but I didn't really even think about it as a factor on the downhills at all. Like, it didn't feel like I was muscling around a heavy bike. And it doesn't really feel that way on this either, from a weight perspective. You have to muscle it around because it's big, but not necessarily, I think, because it's heavy.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a single carbon fiber component on that bike, which is kind of cool. And yeah, it's just this metal bike. And I mean, nothing on it, I would say, overly heavy. I mean, I guess those DT rims were essentially a downhill wheel. So it's basically a downhill biking pedal uphill, which is just, it's practical in an impractical way.
Yeah.
But the performance is definitely there if you like pointing the bike down the hill and are willing to suffer a little bit climbing. But climbing's going to hurt anyway. So, you know, put on a 32-tooth chainring and pedal. It's not that bad.
Some pretty sound reasoning.
But yeah, without timing, it's hard to know. Like, that bike feels obviously like slower, but you're probably not. Like, that bike you just like throw through tight turns and like make very quick direction changes, which like it feels fast, but is it like fast on the clock? That's a different question.
Yeah.
Or
making mid-corner adjustments on this is more challenging, but the amount of mid-corner adjustments you need to make is drastically lower. So choose your battles, or at least they are for me, since I'm used to this thing. Cool. Well, I think that's about it. Just wanted to ride with Nick, switch bikes since we happen to have pretty much the same one in different sizes. So that's our 2 cents. And thanks for watching. We'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.
I have blood all over my legs from fucking mosquitoes.
Okay, I gotta get beauty shots of these things real quick.